Today, Dr. Joe Roman is an author, conservation biologist, and research affiliate at the University of Vermont. But 20 years ago, he was living in Boston and spending his days on the water, collecting European green crabs for his PhD program. These animals are considered one of the most invasive species in saltwater ecosystems. As Roman fished for crabs, a nearby stranger harvested non-native snails to later sell as food, having no idea that he spurred Roman's new perspective on eradicating invasive species.
As a conservation biologist, you're often concerned with eating too much. We've taken too many fish out of the ocean or hunted too many birds off land or killed off most of the bison. But it occurred to me that maybe we could flip the script a bit and think about ways that we could use our appetite in a good way.
This experience paved the way for Roman's idea of eating invasive species to help the environment.
I hadn't seen anyone frame it this way. Of course, people have been eating invasive species forever, just not as a conservation angle. I mean, some of the reasons that several of these species think of greens, like, well, maybe dandelions or even burdock or others, they were brought here on purpose because people like to eat them, right? A better example would be feral pigs, right? So they were intentionally introduced in North America and released because they would be good food. But then the numbers got high and they started to cause ecological damage,
Which branded them as one of the most destructive invasive species in America. But the term invasive doesn't simply mean non-native plants and animals. In fact, Dr. Cindy Tam says that there are many foreign species that exist in harmony within their ecosystems, whether they migrated or were brought over by humans. Tam is a biological threats and invasive species research program coordinator at the U.S. Geological Survey. She says that most of these species don't cause noticeable harm to their new environment. The issues arise when some of the plants or animals turn invasive by federal standards.
We have a definition of what an invasive species is, and it requires that species to be non-native to the ecosystem you're looking at and that it causes harm, whether that harm is to the economy, to the environment, or to human health.
But just because a species is deemed harmful doesn't mean we can't benefit from them in some way.
Such as removing Burmese pythons from the Everglades for leather, or commercial harvest of invasive carps for food or fertilizer, and fishing, for instance, for lionfish for restaurants. So it doesn't mean we can't be looking to make lemonade out of the situation. And there are even times when invasive species provide habitat for a native species, and that habitat becomes important. An example of that is the southwestern willow flycatcher. It's a federally endangered bird in the Southwest, and their natural habitat's very degraded by human activities, and the spread of a riparian shrub, so it's called salt cedar or tamarisk, and it lives along the rivers in the Southwest. And that cover that tamarisk provides has become critical habitat for this endangered bird.
Unfortunately, these benefits don't outweigh the threat invasive species pose to their environments. Even though one invasive plant provides a habitat for endangered birds, countless others are actively killing off the native species.
Sadly, there have been hundreds of extinctions as a result of invasive species, billions of dollars spent to try and control populations, right? A lot of invasives bring diseases. So we can think about West Nile virus, for example. It came in, is an invasive pathogen that came in and then was spread by non-native birds. So you can have health impacts. We use the term weeds, but lots of non-natives compete with agricultural crops. So often people are paying in order to use herbicides and try to reduce those numbers as well.
Not to mention the effects invasive species have on fisheries and infrastructure. For example, zebra mussels are about the size of a fingernail, but they can cause a lot of damage.
These are small mussels that are spread throughout the United States. It came from the Baltic region, and they clog intake pipes going into power plants and also cause millions and millions of dollars of damage a year. So overall, there's been a lot of estimates. There's not been a lot of great studies about the cost of invasive species in the United States, but one estimate was over $100 billion a year.
Cheatgrass is another example of how impactful invasive species can be on the economy. It's a weed that overruns native plants and encourages wildfires. The U.S. government has programs in place to eradicate these problem plants and animals, but as we've learned, these efforts can cost billions of dollars. Roman's idea of adding invasive species into our diet takes a different approach to solving this issue.
There's this idea of functional eradication. That is, So we know that these animals have an ecological impact. Let's take lionfish, for example. When lionfish are around, native fish populations go down. And some of these are endangered species. When you take out these lionfish, and we have evidence of this now, those native populations can come back up. We're not going to hunt out. I think it's highly unlikely we'll ever eat every lionfish, honestly. But we can have an impact on the numbers and on their ecological effects when we're eating them.
Though invasive species have been an expensive issue for a long time, when Roman first posed this idea in 2004, he says that there wasn't any public interest.
People thought it was kind of a cute idea. Some people pushed back. But at that point, the term locavore didn't even exist. This was a while ago. And I have to say, once chefs started to catch on to this idea, and the term invasivorism sort of arose in the following years, we started to see a shift. And I started to see increased interest both from the conservation community as well as people that like to try new local products.
The idea of shopping local has become increasingly popular in recent years. Over the last 2 decades, more and more restaurants are joining the farm-to-table movement. It celebrates locally sourced ingredients over processed and imported foods. By including invasive species into your diet, Roman says that we get fresh food from our communities while also helping the ecosystem.
In the beginning, when I pitched this idea, I would be like, we have an impact on native species, so it should work on invasives. But now there's evidence since that time, and we'll return to the lionfish as the best case, best example. 2 islands in the Caribbean, one encourages fishing of lionfish and the other doesn't. And we see in areas where fishing is encouraged that the population of lionfish goes down, where it stays about the same in areas where they're not encouraging fishing. And then again, the really exciting part of this is not so much that the lionfish populations are going down, but the native species are going up.
There are other diets that aim to help the environment, such as being a vegetarian, but which option is better?
I would say they're different approaches, and my family members who are vegetarians, and so I wouldn't encourage anyone who already has that lifestyle to say, "Oh, well, you should start eating invasives. Add these animals to your plate." I mean, I think that that's an important approach. And certainly switching to a vegetarian diet is going to have a great impact on carbon emissions and reducing habitat destruction from cattle industry. So I would say both of them can have a positive impact on the environment and be a good choice for people. And, I would argue also it's healthy eating locally, as long as you're locally sourcing these, that you are getting really good, fresh, local food. The first time I had a green crab, I still remember it. I mean, it was a soft shell crab, and it was delicious because it was fresh.
However, Roman admits his plan won't work for all invasive species. In that case, he says we need to lean on the prevention measures set in place by the environmental agencies in the U.S.
Let's be clear, the most important thing is prevention. No more invasives. The goal is not that we want to have new species on the menu every year, right?
Tam is a part of this process with her position at the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS. It's the research arm of the Department of the Interior that provides scientific data on natural hazards and the environment.
The thing about invasive species management and control is that it takes a lot of different authorities. Some federal agencies can go onto private property and some can't. Some just need to stay within the park borders. States are responsible for managing a lot of invasive species populations. And it really takes bringing all of the expertise and all of the different resources that federal, state, tribal, municipal, and non-governmental organizations can bring to that problem. USGS works with Fish and Wildlife Service and the Army Corps of Engineers and states in the Mississippi River drainage to contain and to reduce the populations of invasive bighead and silver carp. So we all work together with the states. We all bring our resources to attack a very difficult problem, such as the spread of millions of invasive carp.
And as these large-scale efforts continue to chip away at invasive populations, Roman says that eating the species in your community is a way you can contribute to the effort.
When you're out there, you're getting outside, you're collecting these, you know where it's coming from. I think that has an impact, can be really beneficial in many ways. And that's the way I think of Eat the Invaders, right? Is one tool, one approach among many that we're going to need in order to fight this big problem of invasive species.
Roman has created a website called eattheinvaders.org where you can learn more about this topic. He's compiled around 30 different invasive species, where to find them, how to harvest them, and even includes recipe ideas. You can find more information about Doctors Joe Roman and Cindy Tam on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield. This segment is brought to you by Capital One. You don't need special gadgets to be a hero. With unlimited 1.5% cash back on every purchase everywhere, the Capital One Quicksilver Card makes you the hero of every purchase. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
Time is going to just slap you around because you're not able to anticipate what's coming at you and get ready for it. And it leads to a life of crisis after crisis after crisis.
The disorder that may be causing your constant tardiness.
Then the new at-home test that detects both COVID-19 and the flu.
You get more information from one test, and you can either rule in or rule out whether or not you have one of these highly contagious illnesses.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
And then there are times where we need to speak up and say, hey, it's time for me to go to bed. I have things to do tomorrow. I'm going to leave.
The importance of setting boundaries in relationships. Then,
neglected, abused, unwanted. Sometimes families, their homes break up for divorce.
Understanding the many reasons why pets end up at shelters. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.